The machine that keeps a god alive is dying, and I am absolutely certain of this terrifying fact because I am the miserable wretch who sweeps the ashes of his decaying power off the floor. To the countless trillions of souls across the galaxy, the Golden Throne is an eternal, perfect beacon of divine salvation. But to me, it is a suffocating, grinding engine of agony that requires constant, desperate maintenance just to delay the inevitable. Today, the impossible happened right in front of my burning eyes. The ancient gears finally began to snap. My name means nothing, and my life expectancy as a localized sanitation worker within the inner sanctum of holy Terra is measured in mere months. The ambient psychic radiation and the sheer physical heat bleeding off the colossal machinery peel the skin from our bones and turn our blood to ash. My sole wretched purpose is to scrub the heavy, coagulated biofluids, the burning oil, and the constant rain of psychic soot from the lower, exterior mechanisms of the throne. It is an area so incredibly vast that it has its own toxic weather patterns, where greasy rain falls from the high, vaulted ceilings. Above me, standing on the great observation balconies and the terraced marble steps, are the golden giants, the custodians. They are the absolute pinnacle of genetic engineering, the personal, immortal bodyguards of the master of mankind. They stand as perfectly still as statues, their massive halberds gripped tightly, their faces hidden behind glowing red helmet lenses. For my entire short, painful life, I have never seen a single one of them twitch or shift their weight. They are a constant, terrifying reminder that I am entirely insignificant, a fragile speck of dust cleaning up the remains of other specks of dust. I was on my hands and knees, dragging a heavy, chemically soaked rag across a vibrating brass pressure valve the size of an armored dropship. The air tasted heavily of copper, burning ozone, and incredibly thick incense. The crushing, invisible weight of the Emperor's mind pressed down on my skull, causing a constant, sickening migraine that makes you want to tear your own eyes out just to relieve the pressure. It was just another miserable, agonizing cycle in the dark. Then, the rhythm changed. For 10,000 years, the Golden Throne has hummed with a deep, harmonic vibration that you feel deep within your teeth and your bones. But in a single, terrifying second, that smooth, eternal hum violently hitched. The massive brass valve under my bleeding hands shuddered violently, pulling against its heavy moorings. Deep within the subterranean guts of the continent-sized machine, something massive, ancient, and entirely irreplaceable completely failed. It was a sound of catastrophic mechanical death. It was the horrific noise of a planetary-scale gear, a piece of forgotten technology that no living human knows how to fix or replace, violently shearing off its axis. The resulting shockwave physically threw me off my feet, sending me tumbling violently across the scorched marble floor. My heavy iron bucket spilled, the highly volatile cleaning fluids instantly vaporizing into toxic steam on the superheated stone. I scrambled onto my hands and knees, coughing up dark blood, my ears ringing painfully with the sheer physical force of the machine's failure. The golden light that permanently illuminates the inner sanctum, the very physical manifestation of the galactic beacon, violently flickered. It rapidly dimmed, casting long, unnatural, and terrifying shadows across the holy chamber for the very first time in recorded human history. The air temperature plummeted instantly, freezing the sweat on my face. The heavy smell of burning incense was completely eradicated, instantly replaced by the nauseating, unnatural stench of rotting meat and sour milk. The psychic pressure inside my head shifted drastically from a crushing, divine weight to an invasive, scratching madness that whispered horrible, violent promises directly into my mind. A few dozen yards away from where I lay shivering on the floor, the air itself began to tear open. It did not break like glass or rip like fabric. Reality simply ceased to exist in a jagged vertical line, revealing a sickening, swirling vortex of impossible colors. A localized warp breach was forming directly inside the most heavily defended, holy location in the entire universe. The failing machinery had caused a momentary drop in the Emperor's psychic shielding, and the endless ocean of nightmare outside was instantly bleeding in. From the swirling, nauseating tear in reality, a long, multi-jointed limb covered in weeping eyes and jagged bone spurs reached out, grasping the physical edge of our world. A demon was pulling itself directly into the throne room. The frozen eternity of the custodians instantly shattered. The golden statues burst into terrifying, blinding motion. A dozen of the giant warriors leapt from the terrace steps, their massive weapons igniting with crackling blue energy fields, moving with a fluid speed that my fragile human eyes could barely track. The silent vigil of 10 millennia was over. The inner sanctum had just become a desperate, bloody battlefield, and I was trapped right in the center of the nightmare. The holiest chamber in the entire galaxy instantly transformed into a blinding, blood-soaked slaughterhouse as the Emperor's immortal custodians engaged a monstrous demon of the warp while a terrified sanitation worker trapped on the floor watched the continent-sized machinery of the Golden Throne begin a terrifying, unstoppable chain reaction of catastrophic failure. I pressed my face violently against the scorching marble floor, desperately covering the back of my neck with my trembling, chemically burned hands. I was a meaningless speck of mortal dust, caught in a war between physical perfection and unnatural nightmare, and the only thing keeping me from going completely insane was the sheer, paralyzing terror of the moment. The custodians did not roar battle cries or scream oaths of vengeance as they threw themselves at the breach in reality. They moved with a terrifying, absolute silence, their massive, golden forms blurring with a speed that made my eyes ache to watch. Their heavy energy weapons carved perfect, glowing arcs through the freezing air, striking the unnatural, shifting mass of the demon. The creature was a sickening amalgamation of weeping eyes, razor-sharp bone spurs, and fleshy tentacles that completely defied the physical laws of our universe. When the crackling blades of the custodians bit into the nightmare flesh, the demon did not bleed blood. It bled raw, localized gravity and thick, suffocating darkness. Every strike from the Golden Warriors was perfectly calculated, a masterpiece of genetic engineering and centuries of relentless training. They severed limbs that tried to drag more of the horror into the real world, systematically driving the beast back toward the swirling, nauseating vortex. But the localized warp breach was acting like a violent vacuum, pulling the toxic atmosphere of the lower sanctum into the Imperium and spitting out raw, scratching psychic static that tore at the inside of my skull. As I dragged myself backward on my stomach, sliding through the highly volatile cleaning fluids I had spilled, I realized the demon was merely a symptom of a much larger, apocalyptic problem. The Golden Warriors could slay 100 warp-spawned horrors, but they could not repair the colossal, dying engine that surrounded us. I looked up at the towering, brass and iron bulkheads of the lower throne mechanisms, and my breath caught in my throat. The single, planetary-scale gear that had violently sheared off its axis had triggered an immediate, devastating misalignment. Thousands of massive, multi-ton pistons that had pumped in perfect, rhythmic synchronization for 10,000 years were now crashing into one another. The sound of tearing metal and failing pressure valves was completely deafening, vibrating so violently through the floor that it threatened to shatter my teeth. Thick, scalding steam began to vent aggressively from ruptured coolant pipes, filling the immediate area with a blinding, boiling fog. High above me, on the gargantuan control panels that scaled the walls like canyon cliffs, warning runes that had remained completely dark and dormant since the days of the Horus Heresy were suddenly igniting. They burned with an angry, blinding crimson light, cascading across the boards in a terrifying wave of systemic failure. The mortal machinery, the incredible life support system designed by the Emperor himself when he still walked as a man, was finally tearing itself apart. But as the physical pain in my skull reached an absolute, blinding peak, I realized something even more terrifying about the nature of the failure. The crushing, divine pressure of the Emperor's mind was not weakening as the machine broke. It was actually growing completely, overwhelmingly stronger. The Ecclesiarchy, the sprawling, fanatical religious institution that dominated the galaxy, had spent 10 millennia funneling the desperate, weaponized worship of quadrillions of human souls directly toward Terra. For centuries, the Golden Throne had acted as a restrictive anchor, a physical tether keeping his brilliant, psychic magnitude somewhat contained within his rotting physical corpse. But now, with the ancient containment fields collapsing and the dampeners melting into glowing slag, that unimaginable ocean of raw, divine power was violently unspooling. The Emperor was not merely dying. The sheer, limitless volume of human faith was forcing him to ascend, and the mortal machinery of the throne was acting as a fragile, restrictive cocoon that was currently being shattered from the inside out. The golden light of the inner sanctum flared with the intensity of a dying star, burning through the thick, venting steam and casting the entire chamber in a harsh, unforgiving glare. The air pressure became so intense that my eardrums ruptured, leaving me in a terrifying, muffled silence as the world ended around me. The brutal, silent slaughter of a warped demon by the Emperor's golden custodians was suddenly eclipsed by a blinding psychic shockwave, as the dying machinery of the Golden Throne finally shattered, forcing the master of mankind to accept the fanatical worship of the Ecclesiarchy and rise as a true god. Trapped on the scorched marble floor of the inner sanctum, my ruptured eardrums rendered the apocalyptic destruction around me entirely silent, leaving me to experience the end of an era through violent, bone-shaking vibrations and a light so intensely holy that it burned through my tightly shut eyelids. The impossible battle between physical perfection and unnatural nightmare was about to be abruptly ended by the awakening of a divine weapon, and I, a completely disposable sanitation worker, was bearing witness to the very first breath of a new galactic age. Through the thick, boiling fog of ruptured coolant lines, I watched the custodians carve the multi-jointed horror into evaporating pieces of shadow. Their crackling energy blades moved with a flawless, devastating precision, driving the shrieking mass of eyes and bone back toward the jagged, vertical tier in reality. But the demon was not banished by the strength of their legendary weapons. It was suddenly and violently eradicated by the sheer, expanding magnitude of the golden light that was completely melting the containment bulkheads of the throne. As the continent-sized gear systems catastrophically failed and the ancient dampeners dissolved into glowing slag, the agonizing, restrictive mortal machinery could no longer contain him. For 10 millennia, the Emperor had violently rejected the concept of his own divinity, clinging stubbornly to the secular imperial truth, while his rotting physical form endured unimaginable torture. But as the physical tethers snapped, his brilliant, limitless mind was flooded by the sprawling, fanatical devotion of the human race. He felt the quadrillions of souls praying to him across the stars, offering their weaponized faith to the only being capable of holding back the dark. I felt the exact moment he stopped fighting it. The scratching, invasive madness of the warp that had been tearing at my skull instantly vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, unconditional warmth that flooded my veins. He accepted the heavy, bitter mantle of deity. He embraced the sprawling faith of mankind, understanding with absolute, terrifying clarity that he had to draw upon the limitless power of their worship to permanently vanquish the forces of chaos. The jagged tier in reality did not just close, it was violently cauterized by a solid pillar of holy fire. The localized warp breach was scorched to silent ash in a fraction of a second as the roaring light of the Astronomicon flared with an aggressive, weaponized intensity. The Golden Giants, the immortal custodians who had stood completely motionless for centuries, were physically driven to their knees by the sheer, crushing weight of their masters' expanding consciousness. Their heavy weapons clattered uselessly against the marble as they bowed their heads, entirely overwhelmed by the raw, unfettered glory of his ascension. And then, a voice echoed through the vast, ruined chamber. It was not a physical sound spoken aloud, but a harmonic, resonant broadcast projected directly into the minds of every living soul within the solar system and echoing out across the violent tides of the Imperium. It was a voice perfectly designed to command immediate planetary compliance, laced with a profound, tragic sorrow that had finally found its resolution. "I forgive you, and I will wait for you." The words struck my soul with the force of a physical blow. He was speaking to the arch-traitor. He was broadcasting his final, ultimate act of warfare to the absolute darkest corners of the galaxy. By forgiving Horus, the ascended God-Emperor was permanently starving the dark gods of their most potent fuel, the bitter hatred and endless vengeance of the heresy. The immediate aftermath of that forgiveness was a psychic wave of unimaginable hope that rippled outward from holy Terra. Even I, a filthy, nameless worker whose entire lineage was born to sweep dust in the dark, felt a sudden, burning conviction entirely replace my lifetime of crushing terror. If he could forgive the monster who had broken the galaxy, then he could surely save the rest of us. The heavy, suffocating despair of the Imperium was instantly shattered, replaced by an unstoppable, fanatical surge in morale that would soon be felt by every single soldier bleeding in the mud of a million distant worlds. The machinery of the Golden Throne continued to melt and collapse around us, but it no longer mattered. The fragile, mortal engine was dead, and the true, divine Emperor had finally awakened. The decaying machinery of the Golden Throne is violently tearing itself apart on holy Terra, and from the apocalyptic wreckage of this failing life support system, the physical form of the newly ascended God Emperor is finally emerging to issue his first direct commands in 10,000 years. I am a nameless, terrified sanitation worker whose only job was to scrub the burning oil from the outer brass valves, yet I now find myself trapped in the holiest inner sanctum of the galaxy, watching the immortal Golden Custodians bow their heads as the master of mankind steps out of the dying engine. In this episode, the sheer, blinding reality of his physical resurrection shatters the 10 millennia silence of the throne room, and the terrified mortal servants of the palace bear witness to a miracle that will instantly ignite a furious new galactic crusade. The sheer heat radiating from the melting bulkheads forced me to drag my battered body backward across the scorched marble floor. The titanic gears and massive iron pistons that had pumped in flawless synchronization since the end of the Horus heresy were now dissolving into glowing, liquid slag. For my entire miserable existence, I had believed the throne was an eternal, unbreakable monument. Now, I watched it die in a cascade of catastrophic system failures. Yet, as the mortal constraints of the machine burned away, the crushing, divine light that poured from the center of the dais did not consume the room in chaotic destruction. It began to focus, pulling inward with a terrifying, deliberate gravity that defied the laws of physics. Through the thick, boiling fog of ruptured coolant lines, I dared to raise my eyes toward the apex of the terrace steps. The skeletal, rotting corpse that had sat in silent agony for 100 centuries was gone. In its place, wreathed in a halo of solid, weaponized golden fire, stood a figure of absolute, impossible perfection. The staggering, fanatical devotion of the Ecclesiarchy, the trillions of human souls praying across the stars, had provided the limitless power needed to knit ancient, withered flesh back into the form of a towering, broad-shouldered warlord. He was clad in armor of pristine, glowing auramite, and his face, though radiating a profound, tragic sorrow, possessed a terrifying, uncompromising resolve. Below him, the most elite warriors in the universe were completely undone. The Golden Custodians, the immortal giants who had just flawlessly butchered a horrific warp demon without uttering a single sound, were now driven firmly to their knees. They had guarded a silent tomb for their entire impossibly long lives, maintaining a perfect, stoic vigil over a decaying empire. Now their genetic father was looking directly down at them. The absolute silence of the vast chamber was heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and the sudden, overwhelming absence of the scratching madness of the Imperium. When the Emperor issued his first command, he did not open his mouth to speak aloud. Instead, a resonant, harmonic broadcast projected directly into the minds of every living being within the inner sanctum, echoing outward with enough force to strike the astropathic choirs across the entire solar system. The voice was heavy, with the staggering weight of a deity who had reluctantly accepted his crown of thorns to save his species, yet it carried the sharp, undeniable authority of a supreme military commander. "Rise, my loyal sentinels," the voice commanded, vibrating through the very marrow of my frail mortal bones. "The era of our silent vigil is ash. The darkness has fed upon our passive suffering for too long. Open the eternity gates. Call the fleets of the solar segmentum to absolute war readiness. We march to reunite with my surviving sons, and we shall purge the stars of the demons that infest them." As he projected his will, a massive, invisible shockwave of pure, crystalline hope radiated outward from his physical form. I, a disposable cleaner bleeding on the floor, felt my lifetime of suffocating terror simply vanish. It was entirely replaced by an unimaginable burning surge of Imperial morale that I knew, in that exact moment, was washing over every terrified guardsman and exhausted space marine in the galaxy. If he could heal his own shattered body, if he could reach into the warp and loudly forgive the arch-traitor Horus just to permanently starve the dark gods of their hatred, then humanity was no longer merely surviving the long night. We were officially fighting back. I watched the Golden Custodians rise to their feet as one unified, flawless phalanx, their heavy weapons igniting with a fresh, crackling blue energy, entirely ready to follow their living god into the fires of a new, glorious age. The gargantuan eternity gates of holy Terra, sealed tightly for 10 millennia to hide the decaying machinery of a dying god, are about to be thrown wide open by the fully resurrected master of mankind. I am a completely insignificant, chemically burned sanitation worker who miraculously survived the apocalyptic meltdown of the Golden Throne, and I now find myself marching directly behind a flawless phalanx of Golden Custodians to reveal the ultimate truth to the terrified galaxy. In this episode, the sprawling, desperate masses of the Ecclesiarchy bear witness to the physical awakening of the Emperor, and the crushing despair of the Imperium is permanently replaced by an unimaginable, burning surge of fanatical morale. For my entire short and painful life, the Eternity Gates were an impenetrable mountain of adamantium and ceramite, heavily guarded by the silent, immortal sentinels of the palace. Millions of desperate pilgrims pressed against the outer barricades every single day, offering their weeping prayers to a static, silent monument. They had no idea that behind those doors, the mechanical life support system was catastrophically failing, or that a horrific warp breach had briefly spilled a screaming demon right into the inner sanctum. But the era of defensive, bleeding survival was officially dead. The God Emperor had embraced the sprawling faith of humanity, utilizing the limitless, weaponized worship of quadrillions of souls to heal his shattered physical form and ascend to true divinity. I dragged my exhausted, aching body across the scorched marble, following the towering forms of the custodians. They did not walk with the slow, solemn mourning of guards watching a tomb. They marched with the terrifying, unified purpose of an apex military force ready to conquer the stars. Behind us, radiating a solid, blinding aura of golden light, walked the Emperor himself. The sheer psychic pressure of his presence did not crush me. Instead, it filled my veins with an undeniable, crystalline hope that completely erased my physical pain. As we reached the towering interior of the gates, the ancient servitor motors and heavy locking mechanisms remained completely untouched. The Emperor did not require fragile mortal machinery to open the passage. He simply projected his divine will forward. The massive, continent-thick slabs of metal began to part, sliding outward with a heavy, smooth finality that sent violent tremors through the bedrock of the palace. The blinding, harsh light of the Terran atmosphere flooded the corridor, instantly met by the collective gasp of 1 billion gathered pilgrims. The endless sea of humanity, draped in the ragged robes of the Ecclesiarchy, fell completely silent. They looked up, expecting to see the stoic, unmoving faces of the custodians holding the line against the dark. Instead, they were met with the roaring, physical manifestation of the holy astronomicon. The Emperor stepped forward into the light of the sun he had not seen in 10,000 years. He cast his golden gaze over the weeping, paralyzed masses, completely accepting his role as their deity. He absorbed their raw, desperate devotion, using it to permanently starve the dark gods of the warp and sever the lingering shadows of the arch-traitor's rebellion. Instantly, an unimaginable, sweeping wave of absolute morale washed over the crowd. Men and women who had spent generations weeping in the suffocating shadow of a dying empire suddenly stood tall, their hearts burning with a righteous, unstoppable fury. The master of mankind had awakened, and humanity was finally ready to aggressively purge the galaxy. The skies above holy Terra are completely blacked out by the mass mobilization of 1 million warships, as the newly awakened God Emperor prepares to launch the greatest galactic crusade in 10,000 years. I am a completely insignificant sanitation worker who miraculously survived the apocalyptic meltdown of the Golden Throne, and I now stand on the highest balconies of the Imperial Palace, watching my resurrected deity permanently banish the despair of the Imperium. In this final episode, the sprawling, terrified masses of humanity are infused with an unimaginable, burning surge of fanatical morale, and the alien and demon forces of the galaxy are about to face the unstoppable, golden wrath of a god who has finally embraced his flock. For my entire miserable life, my only duty was to scrub the burning, toxic oil from the failing machinery of the Emperor's life support system. I was an invisible speck of dust in the inner sanctum, fully expecting to die in the terrifying, dark silence. But when the mortal engine finally shattered, the master of mankind did not perish. He absorbed the limitless, weaponized faith of the Ecclesiarchy to heal his rotting physical form, accepting the heavy, bitter mantle of true divinity to save his species. Now standing directly behind the flawless, golden phalanx of his immortal custodians, I look up at the heavily polluted sky of Terra and witness the immediate, terrifying scale of his retaliation. The orbital docks, which had spent centuries desperately patching together battered strike cruisers just to delay our inevitable extinction, are now violently erupting with coordinated activity. The Emperor has projected his divine will directly into the minds of every living soul in the solar system, and the response is absolute. The crushing, suffocating terror that has defined human existence for 10 millennia has been entirely eradicated. The psychic shockwave of his awakening has boosted Imperial morale unimaginably. Down in the sprawling, hive-like cities below the palace, billions of ragged, starving citizens are no longer weeping in fear. They are singing. The sound is a harmonic, deafening roar of absolute conviction that physically shakes the ancient bedrock of the continent. As the massive armadas break orbit and ignite their plasma drives, they do not face the scratching, screaming madness of the Imperium with dread. The Emperor's ultimate, weaponized forgiveness of the arch-traitor Horus has permanently starved the dark gods of their most potent, limitless fuel. The bitter hatred and festering vengeance of the ancient heresy is completely dead, and the warp itself has been violently subjugated by the roaring, blinding fire of the ascended astronomicon. The fleet navigators no longer have to chart a desperate, bleeding path through a storm of demons. They now sail upon a pacified, burning highway of pure holy light, driven by a father who has become the ultimate weapon. The towering custodians around me lower their heavy energy weapons in perfect, synchronized respect as the God Emperor turns his glowing, golden eyes away from the ruined throne and toward the stars. He is ready to find his surviving primarks, and he will not stop until the galaxy is entirely cleansed of the shadows. I look down at my own trembling, chemically scarred hands. I am no longer a doomed slave waiting to be vaporized in the dark. I am a living witness to the miracle that saved humanity. The era of passive, agonizing survival is officially dead, and the unstoppable Golden Crusade has begun.